Hey guys, tonight we journey back to the chilly, mist drenched highlands of 10th century Scotland, land of clan feuds, eerie peat bogs, and a surprisingly complicated relationship with sheep fat. You're wrapped in itchy wool, your boots squish through wet turf, and a gust of sea air carries the scent of smoke, salt, and something suspiciously fishy. In this place, dinner isn't a choice, it's a calculated gamble against rot, weather, and time itself. You probably wouldn't last a week here without accidentally fermenting something important. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The name Scotland isn't quite in circulation yet. Locals would call it Alba. You find yourself standing near a craggy village, stone huts squatting low against the damp wind. The hearth smoke curls lazily from thatched roofs. This is a world where nothing comes wrapped. Expiry dates are a fantasy, and refrigerators are as mythical as flying monks. You're walking down a muddy path, past a grazing flock of short-legged sheep who give you the same mildly disappointed stare that Scottish sheep still give today. Food here is everything: currency, survival, social glue, and yet it's a never-ending battle to stop it from simply going bad. You spot a group of women lugging wicker baskets, filled not with fresh produce, but with the essentials of the era: salt, cured fish, and barley cakes as hard as hoofs. These women are the food strategists of their households. They carry ancestral knowledge passed down through calloused hands and muttered warnings, lessons born not of textbooks, but of winters that overstayed their welcome. Inside one hut, the air is thick with the scent of wood smoke and boiled grain. A salted side of venison hangs from a rafter, stiff as a board, next to a pouch of dried nettles that's both soup seasoning and casual medicine. The walls are lined with jars, more like rough clay pots, sealed with sheep tallow and sometimes wax, though the bees are stingy this time of year. The food here doesn't just feed people, it tells stories, starts feuds, ends marriages, and in rare cases causes entire clans to migrate. Historians still argue whether the Great Dalriata coastal split had more to do with politics or a really bad salted herring shipment gone rancid. As you duck into the next hut, you notice a child, no older than 7, methodically layering strips of rabbit meat with salt in a carved stone trough. It's a sight so normal, no one even comments on it. You make a mental note. In Alba, your culinary training starts before you lose your baby teeth. The elders mumble about the old ways, and by that, they mean techniques so ancient, even the Romans found them confusing. They pack food in peat, they dry it over smoky fires, they smear it in honey, they dunk it in ale, and once in a while, they simply bury it and hope for the best. There's a curious calm to this place. Every action is slow, deliberate, tuned to nature's rhythms. Preservation here isn't a chore, it's a kind of ritual. You might think you're just sealing oats in a pouch, but really, you're dancing with time, hoping to trick it into pausing long enough to get you through to spring. And yet, not all methods are foolproof. The village you're in, they still talk about that one year the butter cellar flooded. The cows were dry, the grain was low, and for 6 weeks everyone lived off pickled eggs and spite. To this day, No one names a baby after that winter. You sit by the hearth, legs stretched out, warming your damp wool leggings. The family matron offers you a bit of hard cheese, aged in a cave that smells like old boots and forgotten grudges. It crumbles dryly between your teeth, but leaves a surprisingly nutty aftertaste. The cheese has survived nearly a year. You, on the other hand, are unsure you'd survive the week. Still, there's a kind of peace in knowing every morsel was earned. Nothing here is wasted, not effort, not fat, not even the whey, which someone will turn into something edible, or at least chewable, with enough creativity and desperation. You glance toward the horizon. The sea glints under a cloud splotched sky, and gulls wheel overhead cawing like cranky food critics. Somewhere, a fire smolders, and the smell of smoked fish drifts on the wind. You breathe deeply, and though the air is bracingly cold, the rhythm of life here starts to feel oddly soothing. But time doesn't rush here, it trudges, like you, but somehow it works. Even if the oatcakes could chip a tooth, and the meat smells faintly of driftwood and daring. You trudge downhill from the misty ridge, following a worn trail that leads to the rocky coast. It's early morning now, or at least what passes for morning in Alba's permanent fog, and the sea breeze hits you like a damp slap. The salt in the air curls into your nostrils, into your hair, into everything, and that's precisely the point. Salt isn't just a seasoning here, it's currency, it's power. It's the difference between a feast and a funeral. You stop by a modest saltworks, nothing more than a few shallow pans perched precariously over smoky driftwood fires. Villagers scoop seawater and wait. Hours pass. The water vanishes, and what's left behind sparkles white, coarse grains of survival. You overhear a heated discussion between two grizzled men about whether the salt from this cove is superior to that from the next inlet over. Ours is sweeter, one insists. The other grunts, yours tastes like old boots. You silently wonder what salt should taste like anyway, but wisely keep your thoughts to yourself. Salt pride runs deep. Bartering is alive and well. Salt is traded for barley, butter, even favors. A particularly prized batch of salt might get you a woven cloak or a piglet, if the piglet's not already been brined. That's right. People here sometimes pay for meat with salt, then preserve the meat with salt. It's a culinary loop that would baffle a modern accountant. You peer into a small shed where something hangs from the rafters. Is that a pig? Yes. Or what used to be one of a whole salted carcass, pale and tight skinned like a giant wax candle, dangles next to bundles of herbs. It's a sight that's both impressive and a little creepy, like a taxidermy experiment that also happens to be dinner. Preserving meat this way isn't fast. The villagers rub handfuls of salt into every crevice, then more, then a little more, just to be safe. The pig ends up looking less like livestock and more like it fell asleep in a sand dune. But it works. Salt draws moisture out of the flesh and makes it impossible, well, very difficult, for bacteria to throw a party. Historians still argue whether salt production in this region was independently developed or borrowed from earlier Norse influence. It's a fair question, especially since Norse longships are a not so distant memory here, and sometimes a not so distant problem. You hear tell of one clan elder who claims he learned the art of salt curing from a captured Viking. Whether that's true or just excellent dinner party material is anyone's guess. But back to pigs, they're a staple here, as much for their fat as their flesh. That fat, often rendered down, mixed with ash or barley, and smeared onto storage jars to create a makeshift seal, you now understand why nothing in this village smells entirely pleasant. A young boy runs past you holding a small pouch, sloshing with brine. For the duck legs, he shouts. You realize saltwater brine isn't just used fresh, it's reused again and again, like a family heirloom with floaties. Each use makes it stronger, darker, more intense. You hesitate to peek inside one of the older brine jars, but curiosity wins. It's up, thick, smells like time and stubbornness, but also strangely comforting. A cheeky elder winks and tells you that when he was a boy, they once used brine from a 12-year-old barrel. Tasted like socks. He laughs, but no one died. You're not sure if that's a sales pitch or a warning. You walk along a row of clay pots, each one tightly sealed with leather. Inside, layers of salted fish, herring, trout, sometimes eel, packed so tightly they squeak when you shift the pot. The fish have no eyes. You try not to take that personally. Beyond the salty scent, you catch a whiff of something sweeter, heather maybe, or wild thyme. Herbs are often added to help flavor preserved meat, especially for festive meals, or to cover up less than ideal aging. One woman pats a pork leg affectionately and mutters, "Still good for stew." You suspect she says this whether it's true or not. Salt is never wasted. After meat's been cured, any residual salt scraped off becomes second salt, used for cleaning tools, drying hides, even sprinkled on icy doorsteps. Nothing is single use. The word disposable hasn't been invented yet, and wouldn't be welcome if it had. The economy here flows through salt, not coins. There's a tale of a chieftain who demanded 10 stone jars of salt as a dowry. When one broke, the wedding was postponed, and perhaps that's reasonable. Marrying without enough salt is basically a famine with extra guests. As you walk away from the salt sheds, your skin feels gritty, your lips taste like the ocean, and your shoes squelch with mud. But you carry with you a deeper appreciation for just how miraculous and laborious it is to keep something edible from decomposing in this soggy, mossy corner of the world. The sun is trying to rise, maybe, or maybe it just gave up again. But life continues. People gather, ready to barter, salt in hand, ready to haggle over the fate of their next meal. You leave the salty clamor of the seaside and follow a narrow trail inland, your boots thudding softly against damp peat and matted heather. The wind here smells different, earthy, smoky, with a whiff of old fish. You round a bend and find yourself staring at a pit, not a dramatic one, just a shallow trench dug into a slope, lined with stones blackened from repeated fires. A low curl of smoke drifts up from it, sluggish in the mist. Beside it, two villagers squat patiently, faces soot-smudged, arms crossed. They look like they've been waiting since last Thursday. This, you realize, is a smoking pit, and inside, beneath a thick lattice of sod and peat, something is slowly, very, very slowly, turning into dinner. Pit smoking, you discover, is a preservation method so ancient and low-tech it's practically passive-aggressive. You dig a hole, you line it with stones, you build a fire, then you toss in a selection of damp moss, herbs, sometimes even seaweed, creating a smoldering aromatic fogs. Over that, a rack of fresh fish or meat, maybe wrapped in birch bark or bundled with wild onion stalks. Then you cover the whole thing and walk away. Not far, mind you. Animals love smoked meat too. The result? After several days, or sometimes weeks, the contents emerge looking leathery, brown, and a little unsettling, but they'll last for months, even years, and more importantly, they're safe usually. Historians still argue whether the Scots developed this technique independently or adapted it from earlier Pictish practices, which in turn might have been borrowed from traveling Norsemen or just invented by someone who accidentally forgot dinner underground. The technique varies wildly by region and clan. One group swears by alderwood smoke, another insists on sheep dung for flavor. You smile politely and try not to breathe too deeply. Today, it's salmon. Not just any salmon, but one caught upriver during a rare calm between storms. The villagers are reverent. A good fish, well smoked, means prestige, trade, and a reason to stay alive when the ground freezes and the oatcakes run out. You glance around, nets hang drying, weighted with stones. Fish skins stretch between driftwood poles like a weird medieval laundry line, and beside one hut, a child is carefully turning a flat rock to check if it's hot enough for drying roe. The rock isn't, but she nods solemnly anyway. You're ushered closer to the pit, where the eldest villager lifts a corner of the covering. A puff of warm smoke escapes, curling into your face like a sleepy dragon's breath. Inside, the salmon glistens faintly, transformed from soft pink to deep rust red. It smells of brine, earth, and commitment. 3 more days, the elder mutters, covering it again with care. Patience is part of the recipe, so is hope. Sometimes the weather turns, or a curious fox finds its way in. Sometimes the smoke is too thick, and everything ends up tasting like an old chimney. But most of the time, it works. There's a communal feel to these smoking pits. Everyone contributes, whether it's fish, time, or that one uncle who insists on supervising but never lifts a finger. The shared investment ensures a shared result when the food's ready. It's divided and stored, some for immediate use, some traded to neighboring villages, some hidden in high crevices where only the goats and one particularly nimble cousin can reach. You sit on a mossy stone and chew thoughtfully on a strip of earlier smoked venison. It's tough, but not unpleasant, a little peppery, thanks to whatever herbs were tossed in last month. You can't tell if it's thyme or just stubborn moss, but it does the trick. Nearby, someone stirs a pot of broth made with smoked fish heads and wild garlic. A baby gnaws happily on strips of smoked hair. You begin to realize that smoke isn't just a preservation technique, it's a flavor, a cultural identity, a smell you'll carry in your clothes long after you leave. The conversation drifts to gossip. Who caught the biggest fish this season? Who still uses pine needles, even though everyone knows it's too bitter? One villager brags that his father once smoked an entire deer leg underground for a full month, and it was so good the neighboring clan tried to marry him off just to get the recipe. You laugh, but you're not sure if it's a joke or just a very specific memory. The pit smolders, the air cools, and you begin to understand that preservation isn't about fighting nature, it's about collaborating with it, however slowly, however oddly. You don't rush smoke, you don't question it, you just let it work. As twilight creeps in again, although, let's be honest, the daylight never really committed, you stretch your limbs and take one last look into the pit. The salmon sleeps soundly in its smoky nest. You envy it a little. You leave the smoking pit behind and head north, toward a settlement tucked at the edge of a moor. Here the land begins to roll gently, forming small dips and hollows like nature's idea of a cozy blanket. It's wetter here, spongier underfoot, and as you walk, you notice something strange. Large stone slabs tilted into the earth at odd angles, almost like misplaced gravestones. But no, These are cellars, nature powered food vaults. Welcome to Scotland's soggy attempt at refrigeration. You duck under a low branch and approach one of these semi buried storehouses. A thick, wool cloaked figure waves you inside. It's dark, damp, and a little too quiet. Your boots squish on packed mud. The air is 10 degrees colder in here, and your breath fogs in front of your face. It's like entering a refrigerator that was designed by someone who's never seen a refrigerator, but really likes rocks. And yet these cellars work dug into naturally shaded hillsides or tucked between boulders. They use Scotland's greatest natural resources, cold, wetness, and stubbornness, to keep food from spoiling. A family might store smoked fish, oatcakes, bog butter, pickled greens, even occasionally whole barrels of ale. Sometimes the cellars are lined with straw or dried bracken. Other times, they're just left as is. Moisture, ironically, doesn't mean rot here. It's the insulation that keeps temperatures low and steady. You're shown a bundle wrapped in sheep's wool. The villager unwraps it slowly, reverently, like a prized relic. Inside, cheese, hard, crumbly, and slightly blue around the edges, but not in a scary way. It's been aging here for months, possibly a year, depending on who's counting. Smells like a wet sock, the villager says proudly. You agree, politely. This storage method isn't perfect. In warmer months, or what Scotland considers warm, the cellars can become a little unpredictable. But for most of the year, they offer the best protection short of divine intervention. Historians still argue whether early Scots learned this practice from Norse settlers, who also dug hillside larders, or whether it evolved from native Pictish burial mound designs, repurposed for a more edible eternity. Outside the cellar, a group of children are stacking flat stones to build a miniature version of the storage pit. You watch as they carefully place a slate roof on top, then pretend to fill it with imaginary cheese and dried fish. It's both adorable and wildly pragmatic. Childhood here doesn't come with toys, it comes with training. You follow a trail past several other storage hollows. Some are hidden behind brush, others marked with carved clan symbols. Every family guards its stash carefully, sometimes even creating false cellars to confuse would-be thieves or visiting in-laws. There's a story of one village that spent an entire winter eating only root vegetables because they forgot where they buried the actual meat stores. They didn't admit it until spring. You crouch beside a newer pit, this one only half covered, revealing tightly packed jars sealed with what looks like clay and animal hair. Lovely. Inside are boiled greens, barley paste, and something you don't recognize but are told is very good with turnips. You take their word for it. Up above, the clouds don't so much part as thin slightly. A pale, watery sun casts a faint silver glow across the hills. For a moment, the cellars gleam like ancient monuments to food stubbornly defying decay. You sit near one of the vents, breathing in the cool, earthy air. It smells of moss, stone, and a hint of fermentation. Not unpleasant, really, like nature's version of a pantry that hasn't been reorganized since last century. Another villager passes by. Carrying a ceramic jug, he nods toward the cellar and says, "Best place to keep the ale sleeping." You learn that certain fermented drinks, notably barley ale and something affectionately called goose fizz, are stored in the cold pits to slow their unpredictable bubbling. You smile. Even the booze here knows how to hibernate. Despite the dark and the damp, there's something peaceful about these cool stone cradles, Food here isn't just stored, it rests, it waits, and when it's finally unearthed and unwrapped, it's met with celebration, or at least relief. A woman nearby is muttering to herself while checking the seals on her jars. You ask what she's doing, and she explains that her family has a tradition of singing to the cellars every solstice. Keeps you the cold spirits calm. She winks. Is she serious? Hard to tell. But in a place where cheese lives underground and fish gets buried in smoke, who's to say what's superstition and what's just very committed food safety? You stay seated for a while longer, letting the stillness of the cellar settle into your bones. You're starting to understand the rhythm of things here, how time isn't measured by clocks, but by how long the oats need to dry or when the butter's finally firm. There's no urgency, just quiet, steady survival. Eventually, you stand and stretch, brushing the mud from your cloak. The cellar mouth yawns behind you, still cool, still shadowed. Inside, the cheese slumbers on, as it has for months, maybe years. You nod a silent farewell to the mound of food tucked into the hill like a treasure hoard. Because here, in 10th century Alba, it is treasure. Cold, crumbly, slightly smelly treasure. You climb out of the last shadowy cellar and make your way back into the open air, where the scent of peat and something more fermented hangs heavy. The trail takes you toward a rough circle of stone houses, each with a sagging thatch hat and a pile of mystery barrels outside the door. A group of villagers cluster around one such barrel, peering in like it's about to reveal the secrets of the universe, or explode, possibly both. As you inch closer, you catch a whiff that halts you in your tracks, sharp, slightly sweet, definitely yeasty. Someone cheerfully stirs the murky contents with a wooden paddle, humming a tune you vaguely recognize as "Please let this be drinkable." A woman nearby offers you a cup. It's preserved pork, she says, smiling. In ale. Ah, of course it is. Preserving meat in alcohol is one of those ideas that sounds more poetic than practical. The ale acts as both a flavoring agent and a kind of microbial moat, drowning most of the things that would normally cause spoilage, in theory. In practice, as you sip the pork-infused brew, it's an acquired taste, like bacon that's read too much Chaucer. But hey, it's 10th century Scotland. Innovation comes in pints. Historians still debate whether the Scots adopted this particular method from earlier Celtic brewers or improvised it themselves after one too many barrels went sideways. What's clear is that alcohol here isn't just for drinking. It's a preservative, a cleaner, sometimes even a mild disinfectant for wounds. And when meat is scarce or too fresh, dropping it into ale is a surprisingly common practice. You sit with the group as they share stories of times ale saved the harvest, or at least saved dinner. One elder chuckles about the year the clan brewed a batch so strong it pickled everything from venison to his brother in law's eyebrows. No one's quite sure if he's joking. The mixture in the barrel you're observing now is a sort of porky stew, its surface flecked with herbs and little white blobs you hope are garlic. A younger man lifts a wooden ladle and sniffs, then nods solemnly. It's ready, he announces, like declaring the end of a battle. Everyone cheers mildly. You watch as chunks of pork are lifted out, glistening and oddly firm. They're then placed into clay dishes lined with dried juniper leaves. The ale isn't discarded. It's saved for cooking, washing tools, or offered to guests, like you, who now have a second cup in hand and a growing sense of respect for these ale alchemists. The use of alcohol in food preservation isn't limited to meat either. You're shown another vessel, this one sealed tightly with a plug of wool and wax. Inside, berries, duck fermented rowan and bilberries, steeped in a mead like mixture. The scent is surprisingly floral. You take a tiny taste and immediately feel both sleepy and cheerful. It's like a lullaby and a party in one sip. The villagers are well aware that not every experiment succeeds. One woman recalls the time someone tried to preserve trout in ale with honey and horseradish. It exploded, she says flatly, took out half the shelf. Another confesses that she once left mutton in too long and the spirits came out. You don't ask for clarification. There's a trial and error wisdom to all this. Nothing is written down. Recipes are remembered by rhythm. 3 handfuls of salt, 1 sleep, a prayer, then stir. The ale bathing process might take a week or 3, depending on temperature, wind, or how quickly people get hungry. Precision is optional. Faith is essential. You start to notice the tools used in this process: hollowed gourds as measuring cups, spoons carved from driftwood, even a stirring stick clearly made from a former oar. The idea of kitchen utensils being repurposed battlefield relics seems entirely on brand here. As the sun sinks behind a slate gray cloud, the villagers gather to share the preserved pork. It's served cold, with dense oatcakes and bitter greens. You chew slowly, savoring the complex, slightly boozy flavor. A gentle tang, a whisper of hops, a definite presence of pig. Across the circle, 2 lads begin a low song about the ale barrel bride, a tale involving mistaken identity, romance, and a particularly handsome pig. Everyone chuckles sleepily, even you, especially you. The air cools, and the barrel is gently sealed again. It'll be refilled tomorrow, likely with goose legs or something even more questionable. For now, it rests. And so do you, leaning against a warm stone wall, your belly full of pickled pork, and your mind swirling like a lazy eddy of malt and memories. As your eyes close, you think, not for the first time, that these people don't just preserve food, they preserve joy, too, one strange fermented barrel at a time. You wake slowly, blinking away the grogginess that only fermented pork and cold air can produce. The sky is a soft gray blanket overhead, and the wind has shifted slightly, bringing with it the unmistakable scent of aging cheese, warm stone, and something a little chalky. Your nose leads you around a narrow curve in the path, past several low huts, until you arrive at what looks like the entrance to a cave. It's not marked. It doesn't need to be. You know instantly you've found something important, sacred even. A woman steps out, wiping her hands on a mossy cloth. She looks you up and down and says simply, "You here for the cheese?" "Yes. Yes, you are." She nods and steps aside. You duck in under the rock lip and descend into cool, damp air. Inside the cave, stone shelves have been carved roughly into the walls. The temperature drops a few more degrees, and there, resting in straw, animal hides, and occasionally upturned baskets, are dozens of wheels of cheese, round, oval, even lopsided lumps, each in a different stage of maturity, mold, and mystery. These are the clan's cheese caves, ancient refrigeration with a side of mystery. They work by leveraging the stable temperature and natural humidity of underground spaces. The cheese is made during the summer months when milk is plentiful, then carefully aged and turned through the colder seasons. Depending on the method, so it might last weeks or years. You reach out to touch one, a smaller, drier wheel wrapped in a waxy coating. That one's sharp, the cheesemaker warns. Bites back if you rush it. Duly noted. She picks up a chunk from a nearby basket and offers you a taste. It crumbles easily and melts in your mouth with an explosion of tang, salt, and something that might be wild garlic. It's delicious, but also a little suspicious, like something that once offended a druid. The ingredients vary by region and family. Cow, goat, or sheep milk might all be used. Sometimes they blend them, other times they keep the herds separate like feuding ants. Herbs are often added rosemary, juniper, or even crushed rowan berries for a tart finish. In one far off village, they swear by thistle juice instead of rennet. For the firmness, your guide explains, and because the cows wouldn't cooperate that year. She shows you her aging notes, not written, of course, but memorized, whispered, and occasionally sung. Each cheese has a name, a story, sometimes a curse. One wheel, marked with a scratch that looks like a tree, was supposedly aged during a year so rainy the cows nearly learned to swim. It's best with oat cakes, she says solemnly. You ask about the security of the cave, and she laughs. We post a goat. Apparently, no one in their right mind messes with a guard goat in a confined space. Ah, fair enough. The cave has other uses too. One corner holds small clay jars sealed with wax. Inside are lumps of what turns out to be clarified butter, aged until slightly nutty and very, very firm. Bog butter's cleaner cousin, you suspect. It's used for cooking and trading, and occasionally for impressing visiting relatives. Look what we pulled from the cave, they say, and suddenly the in laws behave. Historians still argue whether these cheese caves were a uniquely Scottish innovation or a borrowed idea from wandering monks or curious Picts. Some suggest a Roman influence, others think they're simply the inevitable result of someone needing to hide dairy from bears. You can respect both theories. Your hostess picks up another wheel, this one wrapped in leaves and crusted with ash. We call this one Whisper. You ask why. Because if it talks, you don't eat it. Cheese humor. It grows on you. As she works, you notice her tools, wooden paddles, rough cloths, smooth stones used to press curds. Every item is handmade, shaped not for efficiency, but for tradition. The process isn't quick, but it's not meant to be. Cheese, like revenge and peat bogs, is best served slowly. A younger girl steps in and begins turning the wheels, just a quarter twist each, to ensure even aging. It's a daily ritual, carried out with silent reverence. You get the sense this girl knows the cheese better than her siblings. You sit on a flat rock and take another slice. The texture's firmer this time, and it smells faintly of smoke and thyme. You chew thoughtfully, while the cheesemaker mutters something about adding nettle next time. Or maybe seaweed, she adds. You're not sure if she's joking. No one ever is here. As the light from the cave entrance fades with the shifting sun, you rise to leave. The cool air clings to your skin, the scent of cheese and herbs riding with you. Outside, the wind is sharper, and the sky has deepened to a moody blue. You feel full, not just from the cheese, but from the comfort of it, the idea of something so lovingly made and guarded through time. The cheesemaker gives you a small wrapped wedge for the road. Share it with someone, she says, or don't. It's yours now. You nod, tuck it into your satchel, and step back into the world, the cave fading behind you like a secret, but its memory lingers, soft and salty on your tongue. The path curls upward through bracken and gorse, and the air shifts again, less damp, more aromatic, a tang of wild thyme, crushed heather, and the faint curl of wood smoke drifts around you like a cloak. Somewhere nearby, someone is burning something delicious, or at least interesting. You follow your nose and your curiosity to a clearing ringed with low stone huts. A haze of thin blue smoke hangs lazily in the air. Your eyes water slightly. It's oddly pleasant. You're just in time for what the locals call herb hour, which isn't a scheduled thing. It's more of a vibe. In the center of the clearing stands a woman hunched over a clay bowl. Her hair is braided with bits of dried sage and something that might be chicken feathers. A small child next to her is sorting leaves into piles labeled with wooden tokens, one with a fish symbol, one with a sheep, and another with what looks suspiciously like a frown. This is where food preservation meets herbcraft, and the results are equal parts practical and personal. The herbs aren't just for flavor, they're preservatives, warding agents, family secrets, and depending on the moon phase, possibly romantic charms. You watch as dried meat strips are being rubbed with crushed juniper, thyme, and something that smells like mild pepper and old coins. Ground angelica, your guide explains, keeps flies off, also stops nosebleeds, or starts them, depending on who you ask. Smoke curls from a low fire nearby, moss and damp oak smoldering gently beneath a hanging rack of rabbit carcasses. It's not hot smoking exactly, nor cold smoking, it's more like indecisive smoking, and it's very in right now. The scent is rich, almost floral. A raven sits on a nearby post, looking judgmental, probably irregular. A woman mutters as she tends the fire. Not too hot, don't want it cooked, just taught a lesson. You nod, even though you don't entirely understand. You're handed a small bundle of what looks like meat, wrapped in leaves and tied with sheep gut. Inside, you're told, is a smoked pigeon leg, aged garlic, crushed lovage, and a prayer. You can eat the prayer or save it for later, the cook adds. You're still chewing on that one, metaphorically and otherwise. The use of herbs in preservation has been passed down through generations. Some combinations are based on real antimicrobial effects, thyme, sage, garlic. Others are based on hunches, dreams, or that one time Granny Morag said it worked. Historians still argue whether these combinations were learned empirically through trial and error, or if they emerged from older pre-Christian ritual practices. Probably both. Many families have their own drying racks, long sticks stretched above the hearth, draped with herbs in various stages of desiccation, lavender, mint, woodruff, even sea kelp if they live close to the shore. Some herbs are chewed raw to clear the palate, others are bundled into preservation charms and hung in smokehouses to keep misfortune out, or at least keep rats confused. You're invited into one of the huts, where the smoke is thicker but not choking. Here, an elderly woman is preparing something between sausage and spell. She stuffs a cleaned sheep intestine with minced meat, fat, crushed juniper berries, and dried dandelion root. The dandelion helps with sleep, she says, eyes twinkling. Also helps keep your cousin from talking too much. You ask how long it keeps. She shrugs. If no one eats it, forever. The air is alive with smell and memory. Every herb has a story. Rosemary is for weddings. Wild garlic is for funerals. Fennel is for fish. And mugwort, well, no one's really sure, but no one dares not include it in something, just in case. A boy sneezes dramatically after inhaling too close to a horseradish paste meant for preserving cooked fish. His sister cackles and hands him a honey root sweet to take the edge off. You're offered one too. It tastes like dirt and delight. You wander past a drying frame where bundles of herbs are sorted by color and intended use. These are for meat, one girl explains. These are for roots. These, she pauses, pointing at a strange blackened bunch, are just for looking scary. You respect the honesty. The line between culinary and magical is blurrier here than your ale saturated memories from the previous night. Some villagers swear that certain herbs can prevent spoilage by chasing off the rot spirits. Others claim a well placed sprig of thyme can make a side of mutton last till Beltane. Some say that's nonsense. Those people are never invited to dinner. You step into a smaller hut, less smoky, more fragrant. Here, berries are being layered in moss and wrapped in wild mint leaves. The idea isn't so much to preserve them for eating later, but to preserve their essence, to steep into cordials, to mash into sauces, to whisper into broths. Winter is long, your guide says. You'll want the memory of sweetness. Outside again, the smoke has cleared slightly. The herb smokers and leaf rubbers are packing up for now, bundling their tools, smothering their coals. One woman walks past with an armful of sage stalks and a look of grim purpose. She's clearly got pickled eggs to check on. You pause near the edge of the clearing, breathing in the mingled scents of thyme, wood smoke, and quiet pride. These aren't just ingredients, they're old friends, each one a tiny aromatic rebellion against the march of decay. You smile and tuck a sprig of rosemary into your belt, just in case. The path from the herb smoking huts dips gently down toward a glen thick with sheep and stories. The air here is warmer, softer, thick with the hum of insects and the occasional disgruntled bleat. You pass a low stone wall over which two boys are arguing about how best to hold a sheep still without making it cry. You decide not to get involved. Ahead, a group of villagers is gathered around what can only be described as a community sausage operation. There's meat, yes, but also buckets of grain, bowls of herbs, and what looks suspiciously like a sheep's stomach being used as a sort of very unfortunate tote bag. This is not your average sausage making event. It's weekly, it's social, and it's serious. A wiry man with flour on his elbows beckons you closer. You ever bled a sheep for pudding? He asks casually, as if inviting you to tea. You haven't, and you're fairly certain you never will, but he proceeds to tell you all about it anyway, every week, or more frequently during cold months. A few families gather to make use of whatever they've got left: bits of organ meat, barley or oat grains, dried herbs, fat scraps, and crucially, fresh blood. That last bit, of course, is a delicate matter. You're told sheep can be bled carefully without being slaughtered, but only if done correctly, with care and respect. The sheep don't mind, a woman shrugs. They're used to it. You have your doubts. Still, this process, grinding, mixing, stuffing, tying, feels more like a sacred rite than a meal prep. The resulting sausage, a dense, earthy mixture of meat, blood, grains, and whatever flavoring herbs are on hand, is then boiled or smoked and stored in cool pits or cellars. It can last several weeks, especially if dunked in brine or wrapped in fat. Historians still argue whether this form of sausage, the precursor to what we now know as blood pudding, originated independently in Scottish regions or was inspired by similar traditions in Northern Europe. The general consensus? If you have grains, fat, and blood, you're going to make something with it eventually. Waste not, want not. Or more accurately, waste not, don't starve. The kids join in, stuffing the mixture into skins with more precision than you'd expect from people who still can't do long division. One girl shows you how she knots the ends just right. If you tie it too tight, it bursts. Too loose, the crows get it. She's 8. Nearby, someone is roasting a few finished links over an open flame. You're handed one. It's chewy, oddly sweet, with a smoky, nutty undertone. You chew slowly. It tastes like effort and barley, and possibly a hint of regret, but in a good way. While the main event is the sausage, this gathering is also about community. As the links pile up, people trade news, swap herbs, sing songs about heroic turnips and boastful ewes. A boy juggles eggs. Someone's grandmother starts humming what might be a lullaby or a curse. You're drawn toward a flat stone used for cooling the links. It's slightly concave, blackened with years of use. This stone, you're told, belonged to the great grandmother of the oldest woman present. She made 900 sausages on this, the woman says, patting it affectionately, some of them even on purpose. The communal sausage doesn't just preserve food, it preserves memories. Some clans bury special links to be unearthed at weddings or funerals. Others use sausages to seal oaths. You raise an eyebrow. Much tidier than blood pacts, someone assures you. You watch as the links are divided and wrapped, some packed in straw, others tucked into baskets layered with moss. The best ones are set aside for trade or gifting. A few are left hanging near the smokehouse, tied with string and tagged with charcoal marks to track age. There's no written language involved, but everyone seems to know what a slash and a dot means. You suspect it's more organized than your own kitchen back home. As the gathering winds down, someone pulls out a clay jug of something strong and cloudy. You accept a cup. It tastes like oats and bad decisions, but it washes the sausage down nicely. A man leans against the wall next to you and gestures at the smoking bundles. We don't preserve food, he says with a grin. We trap it in time. You like that. The fire dies down. Children chase each other, leaving trails of straw and laughter. The last sausages are packed, the tools washed, and the community disperses back into the dusk, their baskets heavier, their spirits higher. You walk slowly away from the glen, your cloak scented with smoke and barley, and maybe just a hint of blood sausage. In your pocket, someone slipped you a tiny link wrapped in thistle, a snack or a charm, or both. Behind you, the sheep resume grazing, blissfully unaware, or perhaps entirely aware, that they've just saved the village for another week. You wander uphill now, toward a stretch of peaty moor that smells like wet wool and old secrets. The sky bruises into twilight. Though it's only late afternoon, time bends strangely here, like a poorly stretched oatcake. In the distance, you see 3 villagers kneeling reverently around a shallow hole. One holds a trowel, another holds a bundle wrapped in hide, the third holds their breath. You've stumbled upon the recovery of bog butter. Yes, butter from a bog. They lift the bundle slowly, delicately, as if unearthing a sleeping animal. The hide peels back to reveal a waxy, yellow lump the size of a loaf of bread. The smell is complex, earthy, sour, a little like cheese, a little like regret. One woman leans in, inhales deeply, and sighs as if this is the smell of home. Bog butter is exactly what it sounds like. Butter that has been buried in a peat bog. For preservation, yes, but also for reasons no one's entirely sure about. Historians still argue whether it was stored, offered ritually, hidden during raids, or simply forgotten by someone with very poor labeling habits. The peat bogs here are oxygen poor, cool, and naturally antimicrobial. That means that buried things, food, textiles, sometimes even people, can survive in shockingly good condition. The butter, made from either cow's milk or sheep's, is packed tightly into animal skins, bark, or wood, and then sealed and plunged into the bog for safekeeping. You ask how long this particular lump has been underground, the answer. Long enough to confuse the cows. You're offered a taste, and because politeness is more binding than fear, you accept. The texture is crumbly and cold, almost like wax. The flavor? Strong, nutty, faintly smoky, definitely buttery. You pretend to savor it while trying not to imagine what else the bog might be hiding. Despite your skepticism, bog butter isn't uncommon. Some families bury it during summer, then retrieve it in winter when fresh dairy is scarce. Others claim it tastes better with age, like cheese or revenge. There are stories of people unearthing butter decades after it was buried, then proudly slathering it on oatcakes during a feast. No one seems to recall what happened after the feast, but that's probably unrelated. One man nearby pulls out a second package, this one more cylindrical. This one was buried last year, he explains, for the wedding. You ask if he's the groom. He laughs. No, but I'm hungry. The community gathers around as the butter is divided. Slices are cut with thin, flat blades. Each person takes a sliver, places it on flatbread, and chews slowly, with an expression halfway between reverence and concern. It's an acquired taste, someone admits, and some of us haven't acquired it yet. Bog butter isn't just about storage, it's about trust. You bury food in a place where you can't see it, can't monitor it, and then you walk away hoping nature's weird magic does the rest. It's culinary faith, and sometimes culinary roulette. There's an old tale told here of a man who buried butter in the bog for 7 years, then retrieved it on his wedding day to impress his bride. She left him 2 weeks later, but the butter, everyone agrees, was exquisite. You watch as the butter is rewrapped, some of it destined for another meal, some reburied for a festival that may or may not happen depending on the weather and the enthusiasm of the clan's fiddler. One girl approaches with a lopsided smile and hands you a small palm-sized ball wrapped in leaves. For travel, she says, it's portable bog butter, like medieval trail mix but more ominous. You tuck it carefully into your pouch. As you walk away from the bog, your boots squish through spongy moss. The smell of peat lingers in your nose and in your memory. You glance back once, half expecting the earth to close over the hole on its own, and then it hits you. In this land of smoke and salt, of cold cellars and community sausages, the idea of burying butter in a bog doesn't seem so strange anymore. It seems normal, maybe even wise. You climb a low ridge and sit, watching the mist curl through the hollows like lazy ghosts. Below, the bog rests, its secrets muffled beneath centuries of moss. And somewhere, deep in the soil, another lump of butter sleeps quietly, waiting for its moment to shine, or at least spread. You linger on the ridge as the evening deepens, but the scent on the wind pulls you east, toward the coastline again. The sky hovers in that indecisive space between gray and nearly black, and you can hear gulls crying out somewhere in the distance. But louder than gulls, stronger than the scent of seaweed or salt, is something even more unmistakable. Dry fish, and not just any fish. Cod, dried, hardened, battle-worn cod. It might not sound exciting, but in this corner of 10th century Alba, dried fish is the quiet hero of winter, particularly stockfish, a form of cod so thoroughly desiccated it could double as a roof tile or emergency cudgel. You hike toward a village known for its drying frames, long wooden racks set out over windswept ridges like skeletal hammocks strung between poles. The cod hang motionless, their tails clipped for balance, their eyes long gone, their bodies stiff as ancient scrolls. A man waves to you as he threads another fish onto the line. He speaks with the calm cadence of someone who has explained this 300 times before. We dry them like this, he says, gesturing toward the rows, so they last until we forget it when we caught them. The drying process is simple, if patient. The fish are gutted, cleaned, then hung in the open air. The climate here, cold, dry, windy, is perfect. No bugs, no heat, just enough breeze to keep mold at bay. After a few weeks, the fish is hard as oak, almost indestructible. Takes 2 knives and a prayer to cut it, the man jokes. Sark. It's no surprise that this preservation method shows up all over Northern Europe, especially in Norse and Scandinavian cultures. Historians still argue whether the practice arrived with Viking raiders or traders, or both, depending on how friendly the longships were feeling that year. What's clear is that Scottish coastal communities adopted and adapted the method quickly, and stockfish became not just a foodstuff, but a trade item. Okay, portable, tough, long lasting. It was the medieval equivalent of a power bar, but fishier. You sit near the drying racks and are offered a sample. A woman hands you a piece, wrapped in cloth. Suck on it, she advises. Don't chew unless you want to lose a tooth. You take a tentative lick. It's salty, chewy, weirdly satisfying. You could see it becoming addictive, like beef jerky with a cold, fishy grudge once dried. Cod is rehydrated in stews, soups, or occasionally just chewed through sheer stubbornness. Paired with roots or flatbread, it can fuel a household through the darkest of winters. And while it may not win any culinary beauty contests, it has the flavor of reliability, a rare thing in this uncertain world. Children run by, smacking each other with dried tails. Stop that, their mother calls, not because it's dangerous, but because they might break the fish. Elsewhere, an elderly couple is carefully lowering cod into clay jars lined with hay. For trading, the woman tells you, or bribing the cousins. The uses of dried fish go beyond sustenance. Some hang pieces above doorways to ward off bad luck. Others place it in marriage baskets, because nothing says romance like a plank of cod. You hear of one family who buried a whole stockfish next to a disliked elder's hut, claiming it would absorb the bad mood. You peer at one of the oldest drying racks, its beams warped and darkened from years of salt and weather. One of the beams has carvings as simple etchings of fish, waves, and what might be a crude heart. You wonder if someone once fell in love under this rack, or fell asleep, or just fell. The ground here is slippery. As the cod dries in the wind, the community gathers for a light meal. Tonight's soup is made from boiled stockfish, wild onion, and some root vegetable that resists naming. The flavor is clean, briny, and surprisingly soothing. It's the kind of meal you eat slowly, letting the warmth ease through your chest like a coal under your ribs. You glance at the faces around the fire, weather-worn, peaceful, quietly proud. This is survival by discipline, not luck. And every fish on those racks is a badge of patience. Someone pulls out a carved pipe and begins to play a tune that sounds like rain if it were trying to remember a song. The children hum along, tapping dried fish against stones like makeshift drums. The music is soft, repetitive, gently hypnotic. You lean back against a driftwood log, belly full of cod and broth, and let the rhythm lull you above. The fish sway gently in the breeze, their dried forms rustling softly like parchment caught in a breeze. This isn't flashy food, it isn't exciting, but it lasts, it works, and in a land ruled by rain and frost and time, that's worth its weight in salt. Your legs carry you inland again, away from the salt stiffened air of the coast and into the quiet folds of hill country. The clouds stretch overhead like damp wool, and your boots crunch on a narrow path flanked by short, stubborn heather. In the distance, the smoke curls from a chimney, and the scent that follows is unmistakable bread or something bread adjacent. You follow the smell toward a round stone house with a low lintel and thick turf lined walls. Inside, warmth pours out in puffs. As the door creaks open, a woman nods at you and gestures toward a wide stone slab propped over a small fire. On it, oatcakes, flat, dry, durable as roof tiles, and probably just as old. Those aren't your fluffy, modern, yeast risen loaves. These are the breadstuffs of survival, flourless, yeastless, mercilessly shelf stable discs of crushed oats and a bit of water, flattened by hand and baked until crisp enough to echo. And somehow they're beautiful, rustic, humble, a bit like biting into a promise that you'll probably live another week. She hands you one without a word. You bite down carefully. It's crunchy, a little smoky, with the faintest hint of salt and grain. No spices, no butter, just oat, fire, and determination. You chew and chew. You begin to suspect chewing is the point. The Scots of the 10th century relied heavily on oats. Wheat didn't thrive in these soggy, wind-whipped hills, but oats were tough. Oats looked at adversity and said, "Sure, I'll grow here." The grain was stone ground and stored in cloth bags or hide pouches, then cooked into porridge or turned into cakes that could last for weeks, even months, if kept dry. Oatcakes are often stored in small hanging baskets near the hearth, where the low, constant warmth dries them out further. The goal is crispness, not softness, and you quickly learn that a properly preserved oatcake can double as a signal flag in emergencies. Beside the hearth, another woman is preparing what she calls a bannock. This one is thicker, more rounded, made from barley and oats, and cooked on a hot stone with just a touch of animal fat. It smells faintly nutty, like toasted porridge. You try a piece and are pleasantly surprised. It's softer, with a satisfying chew. She beams at you. That one's for special days, or days that try to feel special. Historians still argue whether these forms of early bread evolved solely from necessity or also from ancient ritual traditions. Some believe the bannock was originally a ceremonial bread marked with cuts to represent sun symbols or clan runes before becoming an everyday staple. Others say it was just the most efficient way to eat grain without a spoon. Either way, it endures. The oatcakes are often flavored with little additions when available: crushed seeds, a pinch of salt, even wild onion, or dried berries. You're shown a rare feast cake that has a smear of honey baked right into its center, a birthday level luxury in this world. A child near the hearth now holds up a pouch and shakes it. The sound is like a bag of marbles. Inside, emergency oatcakes, thinner, tougher, seasoned with salt and a little ash. Traveler's biscuits, she says proudly. Mum says they last longer than the road. There's a rhythm here to bread making. It's not about rising times or proofing. It's about speed, necessity, and repetition. You flatten a handful of dough yourself, patting it into shape and placing it carefully on the hot stone. A dog watches you, clearly skeptical of your technique. Fair. You ask how they store the finished cakes. One man lifts a lid on a clay jar lined with old cloth. Inside are several dozen, neatly stacked like savory coasters. "This'll last us to spring," he says, "unless the twins remember where we hid them." Oatcakes are also barter currency. They're portable, sturdy, and recognizable. You hear of a woman who once traded 6 oatcakes for a half-dozen salt herring. Good trade, someone nods. The herring were homesick anyway. And of course, there's always the possibility of repurposing. A well-dried oatcake can be used to wedge a door, level a stool, or if you're desperate, impress someone by biting clean through one without flinching. You take another bite and find it less effort than before. Maybe your jaw has adapted, or maybe you're just starting to understand the quiet genius of this food. Simple, shelf stable, endlessly useful, and wrapped in the warmth of a fire in the hands that made it. Outside, the wind has picked up again, but inside, the hearth glows steady. A woman hums softly as she flips a bannock. The scent of warm grain and stone fills the room like a blanket you can bite. You tuck a couple of oatcakes into your pouch. Carefully, they're more fragile than they look, unless you're planning to use them as tools. As you step back into the chill air, the warmth of the hearth and the taste of earthbound grain follow you. In 10th century Scotland, bread may not rise, but it endures. The path dips again into a shadowed hollow where the moss grows thick and springy underfoot. Here, the landscape whispers of damp things, tree roots that braid into the earth like old fingers, berries that stain your fingertips red, and jars buried beneath stone for safekeeping. You reach a clearing, low and quiet, where several villagers are gathered around a table made from a split log. On it sit rows of ceramic jars, their lids sealed with wax, leather, or in one bold case, goose fat. A woman with ink-dark fingernails lifts a jar and grins. "Sour berries," she says, "best eaten when you can't remember what sweet tastes like." You accept the jar she offers, brushing away a thin veil of spider silk. The wax seal peels back with a satisfying pop, revealing a dense mass of dark red, rowan berries, steeped in their own tartness, layered with honey, and just enough dried mint to make your eyes water slightly. You taste it. It puckers your mouth and tingles your gums. It's delightful, like kissing a hedgehog with manners. Preserving berries in this way is common throughout the region. The berries themselves, rowan, bilberry, sloes, are wild, abundant, and frankly suspicious in how sour they can be. Left alone, they'd rot or vanish into the beaks of greedy birds, but pickled, packed, or fermented, they become winter gold. Ceramic jars are the secret heroes of this operation. Made from coarse, local clay, they're fired low and sealed tightly, lined with pitch or fat or even wax rendered from bees or stolen candles. They're stored in cool corners of huts or root cellars or under heavy stones by the stream. Some are so well hidden that entire generations forget about them, only to be rediscovered later with delighted confusion and cautious noses. You ask how long a good jar lasts. A man with a long beard and no eyebrows says solemnly, "Depends who's asking and whether they're hungry." Some jars contain berries soaked in vinegar made from mead, or beer gone just wrong enough to be right again. Others float in brine infused with herbs and odd things like horseradish or dried nettle. One child proudly shows you his family's berry brew, a syrupy, bubbling concoction that smells like someone tried to pickle joy itself. Historians still argue whether these preservation techniques originated locally or were adopted from migrating monks who brought with them jars, knowledge, and probably a penchant for sour things. The consensus leans toward both practical solutions born of climate and curiosity. After all, if your winter lasts 7 months and your kitchen has no roof insulation, you make do. You're invited to help pack a fresh jar. The process is meticulous. First, the berries are sorted. Only the plumpest, unbruised ones make the cut. Then they're rinsed in cool water from a nearby spring and dried on cloths woven from linen or wool. The jars are rubbed inside with crushed mint or salt, depending on the family's tradition. Some include a scrap of linen soaked in honey at the base. For sweetness at the end, so one woman says, like a story that doesn't betray you. Layer by layer, the berries go in, sometimes with sugar if there is any, more often with honey or just their own juice. A few hardy families even use rendered marrow as a sealant. You try not to think about it too hard. The jar is packed, patted, tapped gently to release air. Then the seal goes on. Beeswax warmed until soft, leather tied tight with twine, or a cork hammered home with the back of a spoon and sealed with sap. You hold the finished jar in your hands. It's warm, slightly sticky, heavier than expected, a meal, a gift, a gamble. These jars travel well. They're often taken on long journeys or hidden in dowry chests. One woman confides that she buried a jar before her wedding and dug it up 5 years later, after her husband finally learned how to compliment her cooking. It aged better than he did, she whispers. Nearby, a boy is painting the side of a jar with berry juice and a feather. You realize it's a system, a visual code for what's inside. Red swirl, rowan.black cross, bilberry.yellow dots. That's Mum's special, the boy says without further explanation. You're handed a second sample, this time a small spoonful of thick, pulpy, slow berry mash. It's sharp, rich, with a tang that lingers behind your ears. The villagers watch your face like it's a weather report. You smile, and they nod, satisfied. Outside the clearing, someone calls that dinner's ready. The jars are carefully stashed in baskets, the leftovers sealed up, and you're handed a pot to carry. Inside, some pickled berries, goat cheese, and something that might be barley or just optimism. As you walk, the jars clink gently. There's music in that sound, a chorus of survival, preserved in clay and sourness. You look down at the jar, still warm in your hands. Somewhere in the months to come, someone will open it, taste it, wrinkle their nose, and smile. That's the magic of sour berries, not flashy, not sweet, but patient and real. By now, the weight of your satchel is a quiet symphony of preserved things, oatcakes, sausage links, a suspiciously cheerful jar of sour berries, and that small, intimidating ball of bog butter wrapped in leaves. Still, your journey continues, this time toward the edge of the forest, where bees hum like tiny, overworked monks, and the air pulses with the scent of nectar and wood smoke. A wooden fence, more decorative than effective, marks the entrance to what you first mistake for a garden. But no, these are beehives, dozens of them, nestled under tree limbs, tucked between stones, and one perched boldly on a flat-topped rock like a throne. A man with a veil over his head sits nearby, peeling bark from a stick. "Honey's ready," he says without looking up. "But don't clap. They don't like clapping." It's noted. In this world without sugar, honey is a revelation. It sweetens, yes, but it also preserves. The jars in the nearby hut are packed with fruits, nuts, herbs, and sometimes even fish, all suspended in thick amber syrup. One jar holds a single perfect pair, glinting like fossilized joy. Honey here is food, medicine, status symbol, and passive aggressive love letter all at once. You're handed a spoonful from a wide clay pot. It's warm, floral, with a subtle kick of something minty. Heather fed bees, the man explains. You can taste the hill. Historians still argue whether the use of honey in Scottish preservation was strictly culinary or had spiritual roots. Some records suggest honey was offered to the gods or used in rituals. Others say it was just practical. No one likes a moldy berry. But between the carved bee symbols and the softly sung blessings offered before harvest, you sense the truth is somewhere in between. You're shown a jar with slivers of salmon in honey, a strange pairing, but one that works if you suspend modern judgment. The sweetness offsets the saltiness, and the result is a strange, mellow bite that tastes less like fish and more like dusk near the sea. Nearby, a woman is preparing honey cakes, thin, dense patties made with ground oats, and just enough honey to make them feel decadent. They're packed in wax cloth and stored like treasure. One is pressed into your palm. For the road, she says, or for a dream. Beyond the huts, another villager tends a vat of warm honey and herbs, stirring slowly with a stick as long as your arm. Mead, he says proudly, ferments itself if you don't rush it, like wisdom. You sip a cup of the gently fizzing brew. It's thick and warming, with notes of thyme, elderflower, and possibly something that bit your tongue on the way down. It's also preserved, sealed in tightly corked jars that are tucked into baskets, then buried in cool cellars or bog adjacent holes for weeks, months, sometimes more. In some corners of Alba, honey is even used as embalming fluid. Preserved my uncle's thumb in it. Someone offers casually over your shoulder. You don't ask for details. The bees themselves are well respected. Some villagers whisper their news to the hives, a tradition borrowed, perhaps, from Norse or Celtic lore, weddings, deaths, births, always shared with the bees. It's said that neglecting to inform the hive of a major life event can bring misfortune or worse, bitter honey. You crouch beside one particularly large hive as a young girl offers a slice of honeycomb. It oozes golden and warm, the wax chewy and faintly floral. She watches you chew, then whispers, "That's the queen's favorite." You're not sure which queen she means. You just nod reverently. In the center of the apiary is a shrine of sorts, a carved stone slab with a bowl of honey set at its base, surrounded by wildflowers and one slightly drunk bee that doesn't seem to know where home is. Old ways, the beekeeper says. We don't ask too many questions, we just say thank you. You take one last look at the hives, low, humming, alive with golden energy. The bees go about their business with the same steady rhythm as the rest of the village. Patient, deliberate, unhurried, a buzzing, sweet-smelling metaphor for survival. As you move on, you feel a sticky warmth in your throat, and your fingers still glisten faintly with honey. The taste lingers, soft, slow, and steady, like the hum of a hive, like the quiet defiance of preserving something precious against time. The taste of honey fades slowly on your tongue as the path narrows, curving around a rocky slope where the trees grow sparse and the wind picks up again. It's a restless sort of breeze, carrying with it the sense of wood smoke, cold stone, and a familiar undercurrent of anticipation. Something's shifting, not in the sky, but in the people. You descend toward a cluster of low houses ringed with tightly packed stones. Inside, Families are busy with the sort of work that feels both frantic and practiced. Roots are being sorted, berries are being checked for mold, barrels are rolled, sloshed, sniffed. Something is being salted so thoroughly you half expect it to turn to dust. It's the end of summer, and that means one thing: winter is coming, and not in a dramatic, sword wielding way. No, this is real, quiet panic, the kind that lives behind the eyes while hands move with confident urgency. A woman waves you over and shows you a pile of sealed jars, each etched with a different mark. These go to the far cellar, she says, for February. You ask about January. She raises an eyebrow. We eat oats. The cold months in 10th century Alba aren't just cold. They're long, they stretch on like an awkward family story that no one knows how to end. The snow may come and go, but the hunger hangs on. So the summer and autumn months are for preparing, hoarding, stretching, rationing. Every household stockpiles according to tradition and what they manage to grow or trade. There's no standard winter supply. It's a quilt of efforts: smoked fish, dried meat, oat cakes, jars of honeyed roots, pickled greens, a suspicious lump of cheese you're told not to poke until mid December. You're shown a ledger, not written, of course, but a system of stones and carved tokens representing stored quantities. One mark for each oat pouch, a different mark for every smoked haunch, and something like a frown face symbol that apparently means questionable berries. It's crude, but effective. No one forgets a bad winter twice. Children help too. They tie bundles of herbs for tea, crush dried rose hips into powder for vitamin starved days, and gently press wool around jars for insulation. One small boy hands you a pouch of dried turnip slices. Tastes like chewing on snow, he says proudly, but warmer. You sit near a hearth where a woman is boiling down bones for broth, concentrate. She skims the fat carefully, ladles the liquid into a flat tray lined with thick cloth. When cooled, it will solidify into something that can be sliced, dried, and stored. Flavor chips for February, nutrition in the form of a chewy, salty square. She offers you one from the previous winter. You chew it slowly. It tastes like beef, smoke, and absolute necessity. Historians still debate whether this intense stockpiling culture came from Pictish endurance practices or evolved later in response to climate shifts and famine periods. Whatever its roots, it's clear the winter calendar is burned into the bones of every villager. There's no feast that doesn't come with an equal amount of storing, no harvest that isn't part celebration, part countdown to scarcity. You pass another home where someone is hanging oatcakes on a wall rack like edible art. Each one is marked with a thumbprint, indicating its baking date. The older ones are at the back, the freshest near the door. Emergency use only, you're told. A toddler is chewing on one like a biscuit. Training her jaw, the father says. Out in a small shed, root vegetables are stacked carefully: neeps, carrots, radishes, buried in straw and peat to prevent frostbite. The air in the shed is still, dry, and smells like old dirt and ambition. A girl checks them every few days for signs of rot. She names the good ones. This one's Fergus, she says, patting a large turnip. He's a survivor. You begin to understand how personal preservation becomes. Every jar, every cake, every wrapped up wedge of mutton fat carries not just food, but memory, effort, hope. People bury things in the earth and in their walls not because they're paranoid, but because they know how long winter can be, how quiet, how hungry. A meal in February begins in August. A soup on the darkest night of January might contain berries picked during the equinox, and a scrap of salted goose carefully saved from Michaelmas. Everything connects. The past feeds the future quite literally. You sit with a family at the end of the day as they light a small lamp and take inventory aloud. The children chime in, the mother scratches marks onto a flat board with a coal stub, the father holds up an oatcake and gives it a proud nod. It's small, humble, a little cracked, but it's food, it's waiting, and it will still be there when the frost bites deepest. You leave the household with a pouch of dried parsnip strips and the sense that you've just watched a kind of magic. Not flashy, not fast, but magic nonetheless. The ability to fold time into flavor, to prepare now for when nothing grows, and to do it all while humming a song about pickled onions. The wind picks up again. Cooler now, you pull your cloak tighter. Winter isn't here yet, but it's coming, and these people, they'll be ready. You wake to frost. Just a dusting, just a hint, but it's there, glinting on the edges of grass blades, clinging to the low stone walls, catching the morning light, like the first whispered warning of winter. You exhale, and the puff of vapor escapes your mouth like a ghost in a hurry. This is what the villagers call the turn. When the air stiffens, the wind sharpens, and suddenly food starts disappearing from shelves faster than it arrives. You sense a subtle tension in the village, so no alarm bells, just quiet calculations behind every glance at the pantry, every head count of oatcakes, every sniff of a drying sausage. You follow your nose toward a commotion near the communal storehouse. Several people are gathered, peering into a clay-lined pit, their expressions tight. One woman shakes her head and mutters, "Gone to mold." Another kicks the frozen ground. You peek in. A full bundle of root vegetables has turned. The straw too damp, the turnips too soft, the potatoes too fragrant in entirely the wrong way. Spoilage. It happens, but now, this close to winter, it hits differently. It's not just food lost, it's security, time, calories. That's 2 weeks of stews gone in a squish. Everyone has a story like this. One man tells you about the year his family's oat barrel developed a devil's bloom, a particularly aggressive mold that tinted the oats a vivid green and gave his cousin vivid dreams for 3 straight days. They burned the lot after that, the oats, not the cousin. Even well-preserved stores can fail. A batch of salt fish left too close to the hearth gets warm, soft, suspicious. A jar of pickled bilberries cracks in the freeze, the contents oozing like purple regret. Someone's batch of dried sausage disappears entirely, possibly stolen, possibly eaten by a clever fox, possibly both. Spoilage isn't always visible. You learn the nose test, the press test, the tap and listen methods. One elder listens to a jar of ale-soaked duck legs like it's a conch shell. Still speaking kindly, he says with relief. Then there are the wolves. You spot the tracks before you see the man. Shallow paw prints along the edges of the sheep pen. No blood, but the silence of the flock says enough. Everyone tightens their defenses. Storehouses are double barred, meat hooks hung higher, the community's sole crossbow oiled and given to a woman named Edna, who you're told has a score to settle. Food isn't the only thing going missing. Stories circulate, strange shadows near the brambles, missing hens, a goose that returned featherless and emotionally distant. Even when the food doesn't spoil, something else might try to claim it. Still, people adjust. They ration. They stretch. That slightly moldy oat cake, scrape it. The root that's gone soft, chop off the top, stew the rest. Nothing's wasted unless it walks away. Superstition grows in the cracks. A man blames the spoilage on a curse. He swears his neighbor salted his pig with bad salt. Another woman insists the mold came from the air being too southerly, which no one challenges because she's 90 and has a stare that curdles milk. At the edge of the village, you find a small altar, a few stones, a tuft of sheep wool, and a dried fish tail. For kitchen luck, a boy explains, stops the bad rots. You ask if it works. He shrugs. Worked last year, mostly. Historians still argue whether these early preservation failures shaped seasonal festivals like Samhain, with its rituals for appeasing spirits and ensuring plenty. Some suggest spoilage was personified as a force, a trickster, or malevolent wisp. The villagers may not write histories, but they tell stories. And in those stories, often end with a jar going bad and a lesson about humility. You help carry a basket of spoiled grain out beyond the village. It's too far gone even for the pigs. The woman beside you digs a shallow pit and dumps it in, muttering a rhyme you can't quite catch. You ask what it means. Something old, she says, so the next harvest isn't offended. But not everything is gloom. That same night, the villagers gather around a fire. They roast what's still good, tough bread, salty mutton, some beans that may or may not have started fermenting. They laugh, they share. One man tells a tale about a cursed cheese wheel that rolled off a cliff and was never seen again. You laugh with them. It's the kind of laughter that makes winter seem a little further away. A child hands you a thin slice of dried apple. It's tart and chewy, barely a memory of autumn, but it tastes like persistence, like a refusal to let a little mold get in the way of surviving. As the fire crackles and the wind picks up, you wrap your cloak tighter and feel in your bones the quiet defiance of this place. Here, food spoils, wolves circle, the cold bites, but the people endure. They stretch, they scrape, they share, and sometimes they even laugh about it. You wake to the thud, thud, thud of small hands slapping something sticky. Curious, you follow the sound to a squat stone hut near the center of the village, its door slightly ajar, steam curling out like the breath of a tired dragon. Inside, the room is dim but warm. A trio of children sits cross-legged on the earthen floor, their sleeves rolled up, their hands dusted in ash and salt. One child holds a knife, nearly the length of her forearm. Another carefully lifts a goose wing from a nearby basket, its feathers already plucked, the skin pale and glossy like river stone. You blink. These children are salting a goose, and they're very good at it. It's you watch as one expertly lifts the bird and begins packing salt into its cavity with the same bored precision you might use to tie your boots. Salt is scooped generously from a large wooden bowl, mixed with dried herbs and a bit of crushed charcoal to scare away the damp, a boy mutters. Another child runs a strip of cloth through the mix and carefully ties it around the goose's legs. Ritual or just efficiency, you're not sure anymore. This, you learn, is one of many tasks passed to the youngest members of the household, not because it's unimportant, but because children are quick, have small hands, and most importantly, are everywhere. In a home where every bite of food counts, no one is too young to contribute. If you can walk, you can stir. If you can talk, you can sing the herb blessing song. If you can count to 10, you can measure salt. You sit by the hearth where a low fire glows beneath a shallow clay pot filled with rendered fat. A woman, probably the children's mother, explains that once salted, the goose will be lowered into the fat, sealed, and stored in a cool corner to last until midwinter, if no one gets greedy. One year, she says, my brother in law snuck a leg early, broke a tooth. Goose wasn't done being angry. The process of salting and sealing meat is laborious but effective. Salt pulls moisture from the meat, making it inhospitable to bacteria. The fat layer on top creates an airtight barrier. It's preservation science, but no one here calls it that. They call it the way. And it's been the way for longer than anyone can remember. Historians still argue whether these preservation methods came from Norse influence or evolved independently through pure necessity. What's clear is the precision passed from adult to child, generation to generation, in movements more practiced than explained. A child beside you hums while patting the goose dry. It's a lullaby, but the lyrics are about brine and patience. You find it oddly comforting. Once the goose is packed and ready for its fat bath, the children wipe their hands on their tunics and begin work on the next task, salt rub for strips of beef. It's a simple blend: coarse salt, crushed juniper, dried heather, and a dash of dried blood meal. For richness, the smallest child explains, like she's hosting a cooking show for squirrels. You marvel at their confidence. The cuts of meat are examined for texture, marbling, even smell. Anything questionable is tossed into a side bowl. For stew, nothing is wasted, not even the bones, which are cracked open later for the marrow, pressed into jars or spread on oatcakes, like the world's most earnest pâté. You ask one of the children when she learned how to do this. Before I was 6, she says, but not before I stopped eating clay. Fair enough. There's an art to how they salt the meat, pressing it in tight layers, rotating it every few hours, checking for pockets where rot might sneak in. A game of hide and seek with decay, and decay usually loses. Not every family trains their children the same way. Some households guard their techniques, like treasure maps. Others invite cousins to help during salting weeks, which serve as both chore and social event. One boy claims he once salted a whole goat by himself and took all day. He brags, didn't lose a finger. You help pack a few smaller cuts of duck breast, mimicking the children's movements. They nod approvingly, though one corrects your salt angle with a gentle smack to your elbow. It's not flour, she says. Don't bake it. In the corner, a girl is labeling each sealed pot with a mark scratched in charcoal. A circle with a dot means goose. A slashed triangle means pork. A spiral? Experiment, she whispers. Might be rabbit, might be sin. The mother returns and begins sealing the jars with a thin layer of fat. She works quickly, smoothing the surface, then pressing on a linen scrap and securing it with twine. Each finished jar is cooled, then stacked neatly against the shaded wall. They will rest here for weeks, undisturbed unless needed or disturbed by a particularly persistent sibling. You take a last look at the goose, now submerged in golden fat, its skin puckered like it's holding its breath. The children beam. Another day, another meal saved from the void of spoilage. Outside, frost still clings to the grass, but inside this little stone hut, the warmth is more than heat. It's the glow of practiced skill, of ancient knowledge handed down with sticky fingers and gentle scolds. You step back into the chilled air, the image of tiny hands packing salt still vivid in your mind. These children aren't just learning to preserve food, they're preserving everything. The wind bites harder as you leave the salting house behind, tracing your steps along a narrow, trodden path that veers between two hills, smoke trails and lazy ribbons across the sky. But you notice something strange. There's no smell of cooking, no sharp tang of smoked meat, no roasted oats, no bubbling stews. Just silence, save for the gentle whisper of bracken brushing your boots. You follow your nose, or the lack of it, to a home that seems oddly still. A young man sits outside, scraping a dried strip of something pale and fibrous. You think it might be turnip, or possibly the world's most tragic eel. He dips it in a clay bowl of something soft and gray, then eats it without expression. You clear your throat. He looks up and smiles faintly. Fireless cookin', he says like a punchline you haven't heard yet. He gestures you inside. The room is dim, cool, the hearth cold, but every surface is covered with food, wrapped, stacked, layered, portioned, labeled, and none of it is cooking. This is the home of the fireless cook, or more precisely, the family member responsible for meals when wood is scarce, embers are few, or the weather has decided that stoking a flame will take more effort than the meal is worth. And in 10th century Scotland, that happens more often than you'd expect. Sometimes it's the wind, the man explains. Sometimes it's the damp. Sometimes it's the babies sleeping. But there's always something to eat, if you plan it right. On a low table are small clay dishes, oatcakes wrapped in brined dock leaves, dried apple slices soaked in vinegar, turnip mash blended with preserved goose fat and wild garlic, and slices of salt-cured mutton arranged with the precision of a chess match. Nothing warm, but everything edible. You sample a bit of mutton. It's chewy, but flavorful. The turnip mash is surprisingly rich, almost creamy, despite never meeting a flame. And the vinegar apples, bright, sharp, a little chaotic, like biting into an argument with your aunt that ends in a hug. You notice a bundle hanging from the ceiling, long strips of pickled root vegetables tied with twine, drying slowly, sun-warmed, rain-cured, your host explains. They soften just enough to eat by nightfall. Historians still argue whether fireless cooking arose from necessity or was a deliberate culinary tradition. Some believe it stems from ancient fasting practices, days of silence or rest when fire was seen as a disturbance. Others suggest it was simply a response to the unpredictability of fuel. When peat was wet, when wind stole the heat, when the fire watcher was asleep on the job. Whatever its origin, it's evolved into something quietly brilliant, a system of layering flavors and preservation methods that doesn't need heat to shine. Dishes are built around texture, contrast, survival. A bit of sour to wake up the salted meat, a soft root to cradle the tougher oats. Even desserts, if you can call them that, made from crushed dried berries, mixed with honey and wrapped in mint leaves. Cold sweets, he says, keeps the tongue interested. You help arrange the evening meal. Oatcake triangles topped with aged cheese, dried trout slivers, and a smear of herb paste made from foraged greens. The result is strangely elegant, like something you'd pay too much for at a restaurant called Stone and Whisper, and it's all been done without a flame. A small boy shuffles in, rubbing his eyes. He takes a handful of dried barley crisps from a basket near the wall, dunks them in goose fat broth that's been left to thicken in a sealed jar, and eats them while staring off into the middle distance. A true connoisseur. You ask if fireless cooking is ever preferred. The answer surprises you. Oh, aye. The man nods. When the weather's kind, or there's guess what don't like fuss, and it teaches you, teaches you to taste slow, to make food that doesn't ask for attention, but still gives you something back. He shows you a flat stone slab near the back wall, used to press cold set dishes. Right now, it's weighted with two clay plates and a stack of river rocks. Inside, a loaf made from layered smoked fish, dried turnip, and oat mash pressed into something sliceable by morning. He calls it night pie. Also, you nod respectfully. You're given a small square wrapped in cabbage leaf to take with you. Mid-walk meal, he calls it. Bit of salt, bit of chew, won't bite back. You tuck it into your cloak pocket, noting the heft. This is food engineered for endurance, not applause. As you step outside, you realize how little you've missed the hearth. The cold meal was satisfying, curious, entirely filling, and quiet. No smoke, no crackle, just flavor, shaped by time, salt, and intention. The young man waves you off, settling back to shave another strip of turnip. Fire's grand, he says, but quiet food's got its place. And as the wind dies down, you can't help but agree. The path curves again, sloping gently toward the old abbey ruins, where lichen clings to the stone like slow burning fire. The bells no longer toll here, but the presence of the church lingers, in the hush between trees, in the arrangement of stones, in the uneasy way the birds avoid the highest arches. A narrow trail of flattened grass leads you to a smaller building nearby, squat and humble. It smells of barley and something faintly rebuked. Inside, you find a monk hunched over a slab of slate, not writing, but slicing, carefully, precisely, with the grim concentration of a man trying to avoid another bad winter. The table is laid with small bundles, wrapped meats, crusted cheese ends, pickled roots, and dried fish skins so thin you could read scripture through them. This is a clerical storehouse, and you've stumbled upon something few outsiders ever see: the church's role in food preservation. Sin, the monk says without looking up, but has a smell. You blink. Rot, he clarifies, nodding toward a nearby jar. Decay, spoilage. It's all connected. It begins with neglect and ends with worms. He cuts a chunk of cheese, sniffs it, nods once, and tucks it into a wax-lined pouch. This one's absolved. You realize that for the monks and priests in 10th century Scotland, food wasn't just about survival. It was about purity, about discipline, about order. Spoiled food was sometimes viewed not only as a logistical failure, but a moral one. The church had a strange kind of influence over what could be eaten, when, and how. Fast days dictated abstinence from meat. Certain festivals forbade cooking entirely, and in some monasteries, improperly stored food wasn't just discarded, it was buried with prayer, as if hoping the mold wouldn't rise on Judgment Day. You're invited into the storeroom, where cool stone walls hug you with a quiet chill. Shelves line every surface, stacked with jars of fermented roots, sacks of barley sealed with wax crosses, and bundles of salted herring tied with red cords to indicate they're penitential, less savory, more holy. The idea, it seems, is that if you must suffer through Lent, it might as well be with pickled fish. You try a sliver, it's righteous and very, very salty. Historians still debate how much the church influenced rural food traditions during this period. In some places, monks were the guardians of preservation wisdom. In others, they were simply very opinionated neighbors with access to fancy ink. But here, in this quiet place of prayer and protein control, it's clear the influence runs deep. You pass by a shelf labeled with etched stone tiles. Each symbol marks a season, a fast, or a feast. That jars for Michaelmas, the monk murmurs. That one's for St. Cuthbert's Vigil, and that one's, he pauses, an accident. We're praying about it. He shows you a bundle of parchment with storage rules, illustrated, since not all the younger novices are literate. There are diagrams for proper root layering, how to bury cheese in cool earth, and instructions for wrapping fish in nettle leaves before stacking them with salt. We keep God's order, he says, and mold respects order, usually. Outside the storeroom, a young novice is tending to a line of clay pots set in a shallow trench. Inside each, layers of fermented barley paste, preserved cabbage leaves, and salted gooseberries for the infirmary, he says, healing food. You wonder if the cure is worse than the illness, but keep it to yourself. Later, you're invited to attend the blessing of the pantry, a short ritual where a monk circles the food stores with a branch of dried heather, murmuring in Latin and occasionally flicking water that may or may not be holy. The rest of the household watches in reverent silence, except for one child who sneezes directly into a barrel of oats. Everyone winces. The oats are moved to a lower shelf. At dinner, the fireless cook's influence returns. A cold meal of pressed herbs, barley cakes, and blessed cheese with a crust so sharp it nearly counts as penance. But the mood is light. Someone tells a joke about St. Bridget's miraculous oat bread, and everyone laughs the kind of laugh that says, I know that bread. It's sharp enough to absolve a crime. You sip a bit of honeyed ale brewed under the watchful eye of the Abbey's brewer, who claims the secret ingredient is fear of spiritual reprisal. It's surprisingly good. As the sun dips low, painting the ruins in soft gold, the monk walks you out and hands you a thin strip of fish sealed in waxed cloth, safe for Sundays, he says. Unless the bishop visits, then just pretend it's turnip. You tuck it away, unsure whether to eat it or confess to it later. As you walk away from the abbey, the wind picks up again, the fields sway, the sky grows soft, and you begin to understand something that these quiet custodians of salt and scripture have always known, that keeping food from spoiling isn't just survival, it's a kind of sacred responsibility, and sometimes even mold needs a little divine intervention. Your journey winds back into the heart of the village, where twilight settles like dust and the air thickens with the scent of old bread. Not fresh bread. Don't be absurd. This isn't a place where loaves rise dreamily on windowsills. No, this bread is different. This bread could survive a siege, possibly cause one. You duck into a low hut where a woman with forearms like tree trunks is pounding something on a flat stone with a carved pestle. Thud, thud. She stops, offers a smile, and lifts the object in question, a flat, dense, circular slab that looks disturbingly like a small stepping stone. Bread, she says, or a doorstop, depends on your teeth. This is hard bread, and not in the trendy sourdough way. This is oat and barley-based sustenance, designed not for fluffiness, but for durability. It's been baked dry, over low heat, until it could probably deflect an arrow, or at least damage one. You're handed a slice, rough, slightly scorched, and surprisingly heavy. You give it a cautious nibble. It doesn't so much yield as hold its ground. The flavor is earthy, nutty, with a lingering aftertaste of effort, but there's something oddly comforting about it, like chewing on someone's most determined memory. In 10th century Scotland, the concept of fresh bread is a luxury. A warm, crusty loaf, that's festival food, wedding food. We saw the sun for a whole day food. Most days the bread is dry, flat, and preserved in airtight jars or linen wraps, layered with herbs or rubbed in fat to keep the moisture out, and the time in. You see loaves hanging from hooks near the ceiling, strung up like wind chimes of survival. Some have clearly been there for months. One is used to prop open the door. Another serves as a perch for a particularly judgmental looking chicken. Historians still argue whether these breads were intentionally made this hard for preservation, or simply because they were cooked in stone pans over uneven fire, with the cook occasionally distracted by livestock crises. Either way, they last and last. One old man swears he still has a piece of his birth bannock somewhere. For emergencies, he says, or duels. Despite their density, these breads are endlessly practical. They travel well, they don't mold easily, and if you can't chew them, you can soak them in broth or ale until they resemble something edible, or just hit it with a stone. A girl tells you cheerfully, "We call that breakfast." You watch as a younger boy slices one of the cakes with a small axe. He doesn't flinch when it sparks against the stone counter. He dips the wedge in warm milk steeped with herbs and waits. After a minute, it softens slightly. "See?" he says with a grin. "Luxury." The bread isn't without variety. Some are spiced with wild thyme, others studded with dried berries. A few are shaped into symbols, circles, crosses, or even crude animal forms. One particularly lumpy specimen is apparently a tribute to someone's favorite goat. She never chewed properly either, they say fondly. You're invited to help make the next batch. The dough is dry, more paste than batter, and requires a great deal of muscle to flatten. It's rolled on a stone slab with a smooth bone rod, then lifted onto a hot pan balanced over embers. It cooks slowly, hissing slightly, the outside crisping while the inside remains loyal to its heritage. As it cools, you mark it with a small cross and stack it with the others. The woman nods. "You'll get there," she says. "This one might only break a molar." Not all hard bread is eaten alone. Sometimes it's paired with sharp cheese, pickled greens, or thin slices of dried meat. One man describes a recipe involving soaking stale bread in warmed beer, then layering it with mashed beans and fried onions. "We call it night sludge," he says proudly. "Puts you right to sleep or right out of your body." There's a kind of reverence in how these breads are treated. They're never wasted. Even when too stale for chewing, they're ground into crumbs for thickening soups, lining pastry, or patching up that one drafty crack in the north wall, the multi-tool of the medieval pantry. You sit by the fire as the villagers snack on slivers of hardened bread topped with salt fat and sprigs of something green and sour. The room is filled with the rhythmic crunch of teeth, vers dot time. A girl sings a bread song, half lullaby, half recipe, and you hum along even though you don't know the words. Later, as you prepare to leave, someone slips a slice of bread into your pouch. It's warm, just barely, and marked with a small sun symbol. For journeys, they say, or for days when your jaw wants something to argue with. You nod, pocket it, and step back into the night. The stars have come out, hard and bright, like bread scattered across the sky. And behind you, the door swings closed with a gentle thud, the sound of history and hard bread holding strong. The morning arrives with a wet hush, not rain, just the kind of mist that clings to your eyelashes and soaks your cloak by sheer stubbornness. The village moves slower today, wrapped in damp wool and muffled footsteps. You follow a narrow trail behind the weaver's cottage, where laughter trickles through the bracken like a warm broth. There's a small fire ahead, low, careful, barely more than a sigh of flame. Around it, three figures tend to an unusual collection of ingredients: seaweed, smooth stones, thin soups, and something that looks suspiciously like a rock wrapped in twine. Soupstone, one woman says when she sees you eyeing the object. Not for flavor, for comfort. You blink, she explains, as if this is the most obvious thing in the world, that in lean times, or when the pantry's offerings are best described as imaginative, people add stones to soup pots, not just any stones, special ones, worn smooth by rivers, warmed in hearths, often passed down from parent to child like the world's least portable heirloom. The idea? The stone holds heat. It helps distribute warmth evenly through a thin stew, and perhaps most importantly, it gives the impression that something substantial is happening in that pot. A little trick of the mind, the woman winks, helps the belly believe. You peer into the pot. It simmers with scraps, tough greens, bits of turnip, a sliver of dried rabbit. Floating among them is the soup stone, gently bumping against the side like an old friend who doesn't say much but always shows up. This is a day for sneaky tricks and soft desperation, for food that stretches, lies a little, and somehow still comforts. Someone hands you a flat bundle, dried seaweed layered with powdered oats and pressed into a chewy cake. Travel snack, they say, or dinner, if dinner's shy. It tastes like the ocean and ambition held together by sheer willpower. The seaweed, you're told, is harvested in early spring and again in autumn. It's washed, dried, and either used whole or ground into powder for thickening soups and coating fatty meats. Some swear it preserves freshness. Others say it just makes bland things more interesting. Either way, it stores well, packs flat, and adds the tiniest whisper of iodine and salt when everything else tastes like yesterday's bark. You watch as a woman carefully shreds dried leaves into the soup. Last year I forgot the seaweed, she says, the pot pouted. You nod as if this makes perfect sense. Another pot nearby is being stirred with what looks like a wooden spoon tied to a stick. The broth smells faintly of onions and regret. Into it go the trimmings from a week of meals: bone ends, mushroom caps, barley dust, and a handful of what someone cheerfully calls surprise beans. You do not ask follow up questions. This is communal food, made from leftovers, trickery, and collaboration. People bring what they have. They stir. They share. One man contributes a slice of dried apple. Another adds a spoonful of sour berry paste. A child tosses in a sprig of rosemary and receives a cheer from the group. That's flavor, that is. You're handed a bowl when it's ready. It's thin, grayish, a little wobbly, but warm. You sip, and somehow it's good. Not rich, not filling, but good. A food that feels like a nod of solidarity, a nudge from someone who understands. Alongside the soup comes a small slice of oat bread, soaked in broth and sprinkled with crumbled seaweed. You chew slowly. It's not exciting, but it's comforting. Familiar, like an old cloak that doesn't quite fit anymore, but still keeps you warm. The historians still argue whether these stretching tricks, seaweed cakes, soup stones, herbal broths, were born from famine, monastic fasting, or simply generations of ingenuity pressed up against hard winters. Likely all three. In any case, they worked. People survived, and in their survival, they found strange little joys. A girl offers you a piece of what she proudly calls not sweets pudding. It's made from ground oats, bits of fermented fruit, and a healthy splash of mead gone slightly sideways. It's sour, chewy, and somehow delightful. You ask if it's a dessert. She shrugs. It's a decision. Later, the group gathers around the fire, swapping tales of old recipes and questionable substitutions. One man claims his aunt once made a full dinner using nothing but moss, barley paste, and confidence. Everyone lived, he insists. Mostly, you laugh, and the warmth of the soup lingers deep in your chest. As the fire burns low, someone lifts the soup stone from the pot, rinses it in snow melt, and places it back in a carved wooden bowl lined with cloth. We'll need it again, they say simply, sooner than we think. You glance up at the clouds, already darkening again, and you understand this meal wasn't meant to impress. It was meant to endure, to stretch the line between hunger and hope just far enough to see another sunrise. And sometimes all it takes is a little seaweed, a soup stone, and the quiet magic of not giving up. The fog clings low as you leave the communal fire behind, trailing its smoky fingers through your hair and wrapping itself around the stone paths like a sleepy cat. Your cloak smells of broth, barley, and quiet perseverance. But something new slips through the mist now, an oily, meaty aroma tinged with the faintest whiff of singed hair. You round the corner of a cottage, and there it is, a man holding what appears to be a large lump of mutton fat, skewered on a stick, dangling it over a flickering flame. Beside him, two children lean in wide eyed. A third holds a bundle of reeds. No one speaks. The mood is reverent. He nods to you. Lantern roast, he says, like that clears everything up. It does not. Still, you're drawn in. The mutton fat, slowly melting, drips into a pan beneath. As it does, the flames jump higher. But here's the thing, it's not about the meal. Not exactly. This is preservation, illumination, and accidental pyrotechnics all in one. The process begins with rendered animal fat, typically sheep or goat, collected during butchering, stored in cool jars, and often left to congeal until it resembles something between candle wax and regret. On lean days, especially during the long winters, that fat is scooped, melted, and used as both fuel and food, often simultaneously. This particular concoction began life as a roast, preserved days ago in cold ash and wrapped in leaves. When warmed again, it both feeds and lights the space. You get two uses, the man says, turning the stick slowly. Three, if you count the smell. The pan beneath the roast catches the drippings, which are poured into small clay bowls with crushed herbs and oat crumbs, an improvised greasy stew for when supplies run low. The remaining fat, once hardened again, might be reused for sealing jars, waterproofing boots, or, less gloriously, fueling the next lantern roast. A nearby child proudly shows you a pouch made of stitched hide inside, clumps of tallow mixed with dried onion and hair. Helps the burn, she says. Also scares away rats. You don't ask where the hair came from. You don't want to know. Historians still argue whether lantern roasts were a true culinary invention or a pragmatic accident. Someone too hungry to wait, too cold to cook, and too curious not to dangle a dripping lump of calories over an open flame. Regardless, the method endures. It's a reminder that preservation isn't just about storage. Sometimes it's about layers of fat, of function, of oddly delicious firelight. You're handed a flat stone topped with a slice of oatcake and a warm drizzle of fat herb reduction. It glistens. You hesitate, then bite. It's rich, savory, and unexpectedly smoky. The herbs help. So does the hunger. Nearby, another roast is being prepared, this time with a coating of crushed seaweed wrapped in a loose mesh of sheep wool. Crisps up nice, as someone claims. The wool churs quickly, leaving behind a faintly sweet crust. It's what we call cooking with enthusiasm. A woman jokes. You sit on a damp log, watching as shadows flicker across the walls from the fat fueled fire. This isn't a feast, but it is a ritual, equal parts dinner, utility, and entertainment. Children giggle as one roast flares too high and someone drops a spoon into the drip pan. It's retrieved with minimal scarring and maximum storytelling potential. Overhead, the moon peeks out between clouds, pale and round as a forgotten cheese, and someone hums a low, sleepy tune. The roast hisses, the air thickens with warmth and memory. You think back to the cellars, the herbs, the jars, the seaweed, the bog butter. So many methods, so many flavors. And yet, here, in the smoky nook of the village, it all comes back to one primal truth: fat feeds and fuels. A young man sets aside the last chunk of roast and scoops the remaining drippings into a shell. For my grandmother, he says, she'll use it for her joints and maybe her bread. The fire dies down, the air cools. The scent of mutton lingers like an afterthought. You wrap your cloak tighter and stand, your belly warmed more by the ritual than the food. As you walk away, you glance back at the glowing pan, still warm, still fragrant, still useful. A meal, a light, a preservation trick disguised as a family tradition, and, if needed, a backup torch. Morning dawns slowly, as if the sun itself has decided to take a nap. You stir beneath your cloak. The scent of last night's lantern roast still faintly clinging to the fabric. It's quiet now, save for the occasional bleat in the distance and a gurgling chuckle that turns out to be, not surprisingly, a fermentation jar. You're at the edge of a small croft where several clay pits have been dug into the hillside and covered loosely with slabs of stone. A boy lifts one of the stones with both hands and peers inside, then grins. Still bubbling, he announces with pride. You approach slowly, warily, because there's only one thing in 10th century Scotland that bubbles without fire: fermented turnips. He offers you a sniff. It's sharp, musky, and not entirely unlike regret. But beneath the pungency is something else: a hint of sweetness, a tickle of warmth, the whisper of something alive, and it is alive. This pit is packed with sliced root vegetables, layered with herbs, salt, and a liquid brine that seems to shift color depending on where you stand. Fermentation, you're told, is a game of timing, intuition, and bravado. No two pits are the same. Some are lined with stones, others with straw or sheep wool. Some seal them tightly, others let them breathe. The only constant is that once it starts bubbling, you hope you've done it right. You dip a wooden spoon into the edge of the mixture and taste. It's surprisingly pleasant. Sour, yes, but layered with depth. A slow burn on the tongue, chased by an herbal aftertaste that lingers just long enough to make you doubt yourself. You take another bite. The villagers call this pit pickle or bramble brine, depending on what goes in. Some ferment barley, others greens, and occasionally someone gets overly ambitious and tries fish. That ended poorly. One woman says, eyes distant. Still, when done well, fermented foods last months and offer something truly rare in this landscape: variety, flavor that evolves, a tang that wakes you up after months of root stew and dried oatcakes. Historians still debate whether these fermentation practices came from Norse settlers, Gaelic tradition, or the collective wisdom of people desperate to keep food interesting during the fourth month of snow. What's clear is that fermentation is as much social as it is culinary. You're invited to a midday tasting, a loosely organized gathering where fermented goods are shared, judged, and on occasion, quietly buried again. One woman unwraps a jar of pickled nettles, another presents a lumpy, pungent ball that turns out to be fermented barley and gooseberry paste. Someone's uncle contributes friendship mash, a concoction made with turnips, garlic, and the optimistic belief that it would turn into ale. It didn't, but no one tells him. You're handed a cup of fermented goat milk. It's fizzy, possibly vindictive, but oddly addictive once you stop expecting it to behave like milk or a drink. The mood is lively. Fermentation pits may smell like mild catastrophe, but they spark conversation, invention, and frequently flatulence. It's considered rude not to laugh about it. You're not alive if you're not bubbling, a man declares after a particularly audible gurgle from somewhere near his belt. And there's etiquette, too. You don't judge a ferment by the first bite. You never poke someone else's pit without asking, and under no circumstances do you insult your neighbor's cabbage, even if it tastes like burnt moss wrapped in vinegar. One family has turned their fermentation pit into a kind of shrine. Carved stones mark the best years. A small wooden idol, a vaguely person shaped root with eyes, is placed nearby to watch the bubbles. No one admits to believing in it. Everyone still nods respectfully. Children help, of course. They're the designated taste testers for early stage batches, largely because they have the strongest stomachs and the shortest memories. A young girl tells you proudly that she once survived 3 spoonfuls of the brown mystery, and now no stew ever frightens her again. You help layer a new batch: chopped carrots, turnip leaves, wild garlic, salt, and warm water steeped in crushed berries. The pit is lined with bracken, the mix added, and the whole thing sealed with flat stones. A carved shell is placed on top. Good luck, someone says. You believe it. Later, as the sun leans westward, you sit with a small group, sharing slices of oatcake topped with fermented root spread and a smear of honey. It's humble, strange, and wildly flavorful. Your mouth tingles, your belly buzzes, and your heart, against all odds, feels a little lighter. Because in this odd art of bubbling pits and wild smells, you've found something more than preserved food. You've found preserved spirit, preserved humor, a kind of edible resilience that grins through the frost and says, "We'll make it, and we'll laugh even if it smells funny." You breathe in, nose wrinkling just slightly, and you smile. The fermentation pits slowly fade behind you as you wind your way up a low hill where the air is clearer and carries the faint, smoky scent of something cooking. Really cooking, not preserved, not dried, not soaked in brine or rendered into mysterious pouches of goat logic, but actual warm food. You follow the smell, your footsteps faster now, your stomach curious, until you crest the hill and find yourself in a large circular clearing surrounded by stones. People are arriving from every path: cousins, neighbors, travelers, the always mysterious goat girl who appears exactly when soup is involved. A communal pot sits on a wide fire, bubbling. Nearby, an array of bowls, sacks, jars, and slates, filled with various offerings, line the edges of the gathering space. It's time for the village potluck, but don't picture a tidy table of labeled dishes. This is 10th century Alba, after all. Dishes arrive wrapped in leaves, in knotted pouches of old linen, on flat stones, even inside hollowed turnips. And as they're unwrapped, something remarkable happens. No one quite knows what they brought. A man opens a crock of stew and sniffs. "Might be rabbit," he says, shrugging. "Might be something that scared a rabbit." Another woman lifts the lid on a sealed pot and raises an eyebrow. Definitely fish, probably. This is what the locals affectionately call mystery stew, not because it's made up of unidentifiable parts, although often it is, but because so many of the ingredients were preserved weeks or months ago. Flavors have deepened, mingled, or in some cases, taken on entirely new identities. By the time they hit the pot, even their makers are guessing. You watch as one person contributes what looks like a lump of dried mutton soaked in ale and herbs. Another adds pickled berries and a wedge of dense cheese. A third pours in a thin, vinegary liquid that might have once been soup or an accident. The pot welcomes it all, and it works. Somehow, improbably, it works. The children call this the great guessing game. They taste a bite and try to guess what's inside. Fermented carrot, shouts one boy. Wrong root, his sister replies. That's brined parsnip with meat feelings. As the stew simmers, people snack on the cold dishes brought alongside it. There's a mashed lentil cake, a slice of dried oat and honey flat, a pudding of barley and suspicious optimism. One woman passes around fermented turnip slices wrapped in nettle leaves. Another offers what she claims is cheese, but only emotionally. The laughter is warm, even if the wind is not. The food, while modest, is generous. The portions aren't large, but they stretch. That's the magic of mystery stew. It fills more than stomachs. You're handed a bowl of the main dish when it's finally ready. It's rich, the thick, and tangy, somewhere between broth and porridge, with a texture that suggests several food groups and a few personal philosophies. You take a bite. It's surprisingly delicious, savory with the depth of aged meat, punctuated by bright moments of berry tartness or the tang of fermented greens, a whisper of smoke, a bite of root. It's warm, it's welcoming, it's indescribable, the perfect soup to forget your troubles or remember last spring depending on your mood. Historians still argue whether these communal meals had ritual significance or were just excuses to avoid cooking alone. Some believe they were tied to seasonal festivals, others claim they evolved out of necessity, moments to combine the odds and ends that couldn't feed a family, but might just feed a village. Whatever the truth, these gatherings serve more than food, they build story. Someone passes around a flat cake and shares the tale of how she once mistook soap for butter. Another boasts of the year his goose sausage made a visiting monk cry. A third tells the story of the stew that was so good they named a baby after it. You ask what the name was. Stew, he says, completely serious. A girl begins singing a song about pickled eggs and regret. A man counters with a ballad about fermented beets and unrequited love. You don't know the lyrics, but you hum along anyway. And there's always more food, more guessing. A pot is refilled with broth made from 3 different homes. A slab of smoked eel reappears, gets chopped, and goes into another round. One child tries to offer a cold oatcake dipped in honey and calls it dessert soup. No one stops her. You sit back, bowl empty, belly full, and heart unexpectedly soothed. In a world without recipes or certainty, this is a rare thing. A meal that welcomes mystery, that trusts the collective, that knows the past may be indistinct, the future unclear, but tonight you eat together. And maybe that's the most important preservation of all. The wind shifts as twilight deepens, curling through the stone walls and smoky roofs like a messenger with half forgotten news. The potluck's warmth lingers in your bones, but as the embers fade and people drift back to their homes, a different energy settles over the village, one of strategy, of politics, of oatcakes. You follow a small path to a longhouse that sits slightly elevated, its roof better thatched, its walls reinforced with additional stone. This, you're told, is the chieftain's house, or at least the home of the person who makes most of the decisions when decisions need making. And it turns out, food preservation isn't just about survival, it's about power. Inside, a few key figures sit around a long, low table. They aren't feasting, they're sorting, it's distributing, not planning. In one corner, a woman is inspecting jars, muttering to herself and moving them into piles. Trade, keep, gift, bluff. Yes, bluff, because in this world, what you have in your cellar isn't just sustenance, it's leverage. You watch as two men argue, not about whose cheese tastes better, but whose cheese exists. You claimed 4 wheels last month, one growls. I saw the wax seals. The other shrugs. Didn't say I kept them. Preserved food here acts like a currency, but sneakier. You don't just trade salted herring for a bolt of cloth. You offer the idea of salted herring, promise it, hint at it, and if needed, show someone an impressive looking wax sealed jar you swear still contains meat and not a cleverly packed rock. It's the culinary version of a bluff in poker. Except the stakes are your winner calories, and everyone plays. The chieftain's daughter pulls you aside and shows you a shelf stacked with oatcakes. Not just any oatcakes, decorated ones. Some are dyed with berry juice to resemble clan symbols. Others are shaped into odd little patterns that suggest coded meanings. This one, she says, was for a marriage proposal. You ask what happened. He didn't like oats. Enough said. Some of these specialty items are never meant to be eaten. They're offerings, diplomatic tools, edible messengers. When a neighboring clan once tried to assert dominance, the chieftain sent back a small cheese wrapped in thistle and labeled best of last year. It was a clear insult. The cheese had been oversalted and wrapped in mildew on purpose. They got the message, someone chuckles. Historians still argue about the formal role of preserved foods in clan diplomacy. Some suggest these exchanges were ceremonial, not strategic. Others argue they were essential, especially in years of famine or excess. A well-timed jar of fermented turnip could smooth over a territorial disagreement. A cured duck leg wrapped in honey-soaked moss might earn your cousin a second chance at marriage. You're shown a jar wrapped in linen and sealed with red wax. Inside, likely smoked venison, though no one's checked in a while. It's for emergencies, the chieftain explains, like weddings or betrayals. In one corner of the longhouse, a ledger of sorts lies carved into a plank of wood. Each symbol corresponds to a food item, its quantity, and its location. Some entries are marked with charcoal, others with dried berry ink. A small paw print next to one entry implies it has been, shall we say, compromised, probably by a fox or a particularly bold toddler. Politics seeps into the smallest of details. You notice how even the placement of jars on the shelves matters. Prime jars, those with the richest, rarest contents, are stored at eye level behind ropes of dried herbs. If it's hidden, it's not powerful, someone says. You want them to see it. You want them to think about what you're not saying. Later, a visitor from another village arrives. She's offered a cup of thin broth and a slice of preserved pear. Just a slice. She nods, grateful. She knows what it means. That pear was likely from the last tree near the river, before the flood took the lower field. Offering it now is both a kindness and a subtle reminder. We still have food, we're still strong. The negotiations that follow are quiet, subtle, steeped in metaphor and oat references. At one point, someone mentions a cold root, and everyone else nods meaningfully. You're not entirely sure what just got agreed to, but judging by the handshakes and the oatcake exchange, a sheep may have just changed allegiances. You sit back and watch the closing ceremony. Two jars exchanged, one of salted fish and one of honeyed berries, wrapped in moss and placed in baskets. A soft bow, a shared bite, no signatures, no declarations, just preserved food passed between hands that know what winter can take away, and perhaps more importantly, what it can give, if you know how to keep it, share it, and sometimes bluff it. You leave the longhouse with a greater understanding of what's truly being preserved here. Not just meat or grain or berries, but pride, influence, and the delicate balance of survival wrapped in wax and sprinkled with salt. Night has fully settled now, soft and low, pressing gently against the hills. A hush blankets the land, not silence, but something deeper, the kind of stillness that settles into the bones of things. You follow a narrow peat path toward the edge of the village, past homes gone dark, fires banked low, and cellars whispering with the breath of long sleeping food. A young man walks beside you, carrying a bundle wrapped in linen and tied with sheep gut. He doesn't say much, just nods toward the bog. You reach it after a few more minutes, the air thick with the smell of damp moss, slow water, and cold earth. This place feels older than everything else, older than stone, older than smoke, older even than hunger. The bog stretches wide and quiet beneath a moonless sky, dotted with patches of pale lichen and dark pools that reflect nothing. This is where we bury the old things, the young man says, and sometimes the useful ones. He kneels and begins to dig, not deep, just enough to loosen the peat. The bundle is placed gently into the earth, yet then covered. No words, no chants, just a hand pressed briefly to the soil and a long breath let out like a slow promise. You ask what's inside. Butter, he says, then adds, and stories. It's bog butter again, yes, but this time it's more than preservation. This is ritual, tradition, memory salted and sealed and offered to time. Historians still argue whether bog butter was always meant to be retrieved. But some believe it was hidden to protect it from raiders. Others say it was buried as an offering to spirits, ancestors, or the land itself. And still others think it was both, a dual-purpose burial of calories and reverence. Nearby, an older woman approaches with a second bundle, this one heavier. You help her lower it into a sunken wooden box. Inside, grain, dried berries, and curved bone tool. He liked to fish, she murmurs. Now he feeds the bog. This too is preservation, not of food alone, but of people, of identities, lost loved ones buried with jars of honey, smoked eel, a piece of oatcake pressed with their name. The bog keeps it all, suspends it, protects it in a darkness that does not decay. You sit by a small, flickering lantern, watching as mist snakes across the surface of the water. Someone tells you that long ago they buried a piece of wedding cheese out here, just to see what it would become. So, we never dug it up, they admit, but it's still married, probably. A child tiptoes near the edge, places a single berry wrapped in bark into the water, and whispers something in a language you don't know. It floats briefly, then sinks. The ripples spread slowly like a sigh. Later, someone uncovers an older jar, just a peek, a chunk of meat still intact after who knows how many seasons. It's resealed, wrapped, and placed on a small altar of moss covered stones. Still good? A man grunts, still ours. And there's something about that, the assertion, the quiet ownership of what endures. Food here is more than calories, it's memory, it's trust, it's evidence that you once had more than you needed and chose to save it. You're handed a slice of bog aged cheese wrapped in heather. You eat it slowly. It's sharp, complex, and a little haunting, like chewing on time itself. One woman leans close and tells you they once buried a whole smoked boar wrapped in bracken. Never found it again, she says, but it's out there. We call him Old Smoky. He's family now. You laugh quietly with her. The fog curls around your ankles. The moon finally appears. Just a sliver, just enough. You sit with them until the cold seeps into your boots and the last candle burns low. Then you rise. Your pack a little heavier with gifts. Fermented roots, dried berries, a small jar of something that might be butter or legend. You walk back to the village slowly, passing empty drying racks, shuttered windows, quiet fires, and you realize something. All this time, you've been learning how 10th century Scots preserved their food, but really, they were preserving themselves, their laughter, their hunger, their cleverness, their mistakes, their pride. They preserved not just to survive, but to remember, to endure, to whisper through peat and fire and stone, we were here. So now, as the bog drifts behind us and the last of the firelight fades, you find yourself standing at the quiet edge of a long, long day in Alba. The winds are softer now. The ground feels steadier beneath your feet. You're wrapped in the scents of barley, smoke, moss, and something sweet that might just be memory. The people have retreated into their homes, jars sealed, baskets stacked, hearths stoked low with whatever wood remains. Their world is small, but it is steady, built not on wealth or speed or excess, but on intention, on repetition, on the soft, stubborn rituals that turn preservation into peace. The cheese ages in caves, the butter rests in the dark, the oatcakes line the rafters like edible lullabies. Nothing is wasted, nothing is rushed. Even the air moves slowly now. You breathe in, deep and slow. Feel the quiet settle in your chest. Let your jaw unclench. Let the last of the cold drift out of your fingers. There's nothing more to do. No more roots to scrub, no more jars to seal, no more broth to stir. Just rest. You're warm, you're safe. You are, at least for tonight, preserved. Sleep now, sleep like a root in straw, like a berry in brine, like a story in peat. Sleep like something worth saving. Good night.